Okay, today I'm going to be reading from Subpersonalities, The People Inside Us by John Rowan, starting with Chapter 1, Setting the Scene. In a book like this, it seems to be important to make it clear where I am coming from. What school do I represent? What is my philosophy? What biases do you have to allow for? You, the reader. We have to allow for the writer's biases. Starting point. When I was 20, I discovered Spinoza. His philosophy seemed to take me up on to a high mountain from which I could see everything very clearly. Then, when I was 25, I met Harold Walsby, a deeply versed Hegelian who later went on to create a dialectical algebra. He initiated me into the philosophy of Hegel, and particularly into a version which emphasized that nothing is absolute. I'm not personally familiar with Spinoza or Hegel. I'm not much of a philosophy reader. Oh. Anyway, it was a devastating intellectual experience which seemed to strip away everything I had believed up to that point, and then to build up again from nothing. Then I came across a text which said, no one could be a Hegelian who has not first been a Spinozist. Through Walsby's insistence, I learned how Hegel's dialectical thinking came into Marxism and acquired a thorough education in that way of thinking about the world. Also, I made some study of Polish many-valued logic. That's interesting. It just makes me want to learn about dialectical thinking. I also discovered that certain psychologists were dialectical in their thinking and particularly valued Kresch and Crutchfield, whose 1948 groundbreaking book on social psychology was not long out, and Mary Parker Foley, whose book Freedom and Coordination had only recently appeared. I was a long time finding out what I wanted to do in life, and it was not until 1959, when I was 34, that I embarked on my first degree in philosophy and psychology under Richard Peters at Birkbeck College in the University of London. 4 years later, I graduated and went on to become a social psychologist, specializing in consumer research. From there, after a personal revolution in my whole attitude to the world, I discovered humanistic psychology and found it very congenial, and also became interested in radical psychology. I'm going to very quickly look up the word congenial. Congenial, pleasant because of personality, qualities, or interests that are similar to one's own. Or pleasant or agreeable because it's suited to one's own taste or inclination. Oh, interesting. That's an interesting, potentially useful word. The whole field of group work opened up and interested me very much, as I have explained in more detail elsewhere. Rowan in Press. Later, in 1974, I took the Diploma in Applied Behavioral Science under John Southgate at the Polytechnic of North London, became an organizational psychologist specializing in research and group work, and joined the Occupational Psychology Division of the British Psychological Society. And from there, after another traumatic turnaround, I became a counselor and psychotherapist, joining the British Association for Counseling, and later becoming part of the committee dealing with the accreditation of individual counselors, and the Association of Humanistic Psychology Practitioners, where I became part of the membership committee. Later, I helped to found the Institute of Psychotherapy and Social Studies, where I had to work with psychoanalysts in an integrated course and learned a great deal about Freud and the object relations school. It was out of this experience that my book, The Reality Game, A Guide to Humanistic Counseling and Psychotherapy, emerged in 1983. My own experience in psychotherapy started in groups: Encounter, Psychodrama, Gestalt, Tavistock, T-groups, psychosynthesis, bioenergetics, movement, marathon, and so on. Moved into co-counseling, where I became a teacher with the Barefoot Psychoanalyst School. And from there into psychotherapy after I had trained with Dr. William Swartley in the approach known as primal integration. See Rowan's work in 1988, which is in many ways very close to the object relations school in psychoanalysis, represented by people like Balint, Fairbank, Guntrip, and Winnicott. At present, I am seeing a Jungian analyst, and this represents the longest period of one-to-one work in my experience. I find much in the Jungian approach which helps to integrate the humanistic and the psychoanalytic. This puts me in the position of coming from a basically humanist orientation, but being able to see and use material from the psychoanalytic schools and also from academic psychology, academic philosophy and psychology. With this much as preamble, let us embark on a quest which will take us into all these areas and more. Definitions. Most of us have had the experience of being taken over by a part of ourselves which we didn't know was there. We say, I don't know what got into me. This is generally a negative experience, though it can be positive too. The way in which we usually recognize the presence of a subpersonality is that we find ourselves in a particular situation acting in ways which we do not like or which go against our interests, and unable to change this by an act of will or a conscious decision. This lasts as long as the situation lasts, perhaps a few minutes, perhaps an hour, perhaps a few hours, and then it changes by itself when we leave the situation and go into a different one. As long as 15 years ago, it was possible for a good and quite uncontroversial text on social psychology, Middlebrook 1974, to say things like, thus the individual is not a single self, but many selves, which change somewhat as the individual shifts from situation to situation and person to person. We are, in short, what the situation demands. The question of whether there are parts of a person which can be talked to and worked with as if they were separate little personalities with a will of their own is one which has fascinated nearly everyone who has had to work with people in any depth. Phrases like, on the one hand I want to, on the other hand I don't know how I could have done it. It was as if a voice was telling me off, are so common that they inevitably give a counselor or therapist the cue that more than one system is at work. Internalized mothers and fathers are so common that it has almost become a joke. All these are examples of ways in which the idea of subpersonalities presents itself very patently and obviously. It is an extraordinary fact that there is at present no systematic book on subpersonalities, and the word does not appear in any text on personality theory known to me. It is not in the dictionaries of psychology, nor in the dictionaries of psychotherapy. Yet the thing itself is used by virtually every clinician who has ever written about working with people, and by more and more psychologists paying attention to what is there as opposed to what is supposed to be there. Whether with Freud we talk about the ego, the id, and the superego. Whether with Jung we talk about the complexes or the archetypes. Whether with Verdern or Byrne or John Watkins we talk about ego states. Whether with Lewin we talk about subregions of the personality. Whether with Pearls we talk about the top dog and the underdog or retroflexion. Whether with Klein or Fairbank or Guntrip we talk about internal objects. Whether with Balint we talk about the child in the patient. Whether with Mary Watkins we talk about imaginal objects. Whether with McAdams we talk about imagos. Whether with Hilgard we talk about the hidden observer. Whether with Tart we talk about identity states, whether with Denzin we talk about the emotionally divided self, whether with Winnicott or Lake or Janov or Laying we talk about the false or unreal self, whether with the Jurdegeef we talk about the little eyes, whether with Goffman we talk about multiple selling, whether with Marr we talk about deeper potentials, whether with Stone and Winkleman we talk about energy patterns, Whether with Mayer, we talk about a community of self. Whether with Ornstein, we talk about small minds. Whether with Gazaniga or Minsky, we talk about agents and agencies within the mind. Whether with Gergen or Martindale or O'Connor or Shapiro, we talk about subselves. Whether with Strauss or Rawson, we talk about sub-identities. Whether with Marcus, we talk about possible selves. Whether with Kilstrom and Cantor, we talk about self-schemas. Whether with T.B. Rogers, we talk about prototypes. Whether with Bears, we talk about alter personalities, or whether with Sciagiolo or Redfern, we talk about subpersonalities. All the time, we are talking about the same thing, this thing which is not mentioned in the textbooks of personality. My own working definition of subpersonality is a semi-permanent and semi-autonomous region of the personality capable of acting as a person. This goes further than the definition offered by Brown in 1979, who says that subpersonalities are patterns of feelings, thoughts, behaviors, perceptions, postures, and ways of moving which tend to coalesce in response to various recurring situations in life. And I think it is an improvement on the definition of an ego state, which we shall see later is another name for a subpersonality of Watkins. Where he says that it is a coherent system of behaviors and experiences with boundaries more or less permeable, which separate it from other such systems within the overall self. It is very close to the definition which Tart gives of what he calls identity states, a unique configuration or system of psychological structures or subsystems to which the sense of I is given. But perhaps it is best of all to say with Bears that dissociation is not an either-or phenomenon, but exists along a dissociative continuum. At one end of this continuum are fluctuations in mood, interpreted as a state of mind organized around a particular emotion. Moods can be transient even when they seem quite long-lasting. Basically, they can come and go, leaving no trace behind. Similarly, with hypnotic altered states of consciousness or the altered states due to drugs, these too can be powerful and impressive at the time, but vanish as though they had never been. They're basically transient. Further along the continuum, but still well within the range of normal experience, are the roles and ego states and subpersonalities within which individuals perform state-specific tasks and life activities. It is this region of the continuum with which we shall be concerned in this book. A particular set of circumstances will call forth a particular identifiable and relatively long-lasting subpersonality, which existed before that moment and will continue to exist after it. Marie-Louise Monfrance has suggested in an interview on film that subpersonalities themselves have a range of relative dissociation, such that they take us over sometimes mildly and sometimes more forcefully. I could give you a whole list of the persons I can be. I am an old peasant woman who thinks of cooking and of the house. I am a scholar who thinks about deciphering manuscripts. I am a psychotherapist who thinks about how to interpret people's dreams. I am a mischievous little boy who enjoys the company of a 10-year-old and playing mischievous tricks on adults, and so on. I could give you 20 more such characters. They suddenly enter you, but if you see what is happening, you can keep them out of your system, play with them, and put them aside again. But if you are possessed, they enter you involuntarily, and you act them involuntarily. Boa, 1988, page 241. She goes on to say that the possession by the animus is a common problem for women and the men who live with them. We shall come back to this later. Further along again, and now I think outside the range of normality, are the states of possession detailed by Crabtree, where a family member who may be alive or dead can somehow enter into a person and influence them, often against their will. At the far end of this continuum are the very dissociated states, characterized by fugue and amnesia, which come under the heading of psychiatric states of dissociated personality. These have been dealt with in terms of standard psychiatric categories, because they are very serious and disabling. But we are not concerned in this book with multiple personalities as such, because they are too extreme. In this book, we are dealing with the people who are as normal as you and I. That's funny. given that I am plural, but yeah. The fact seems to be that there are many researchers and practitioners using conceptual systems which bring in the idea of subpersonalities in some form, all working independently of one another and using different terms and different ways of thinking about the matter. It seems then that there is room for a full-scale book which will deal with the matter fully, showing how important it is for any truly adequate personality theory, and how relevant it is both in psychotherapy and in everyday life, and sorting out the varied terminology which makes the field difficult to grapple with. One possible source of confusion needs to be dealt with at the start, though it will recur at various points within the whole treatment of the subject. That is that it is important that on the one hand, we want to reify the subpersonalities, turn them into solid objects, as it were, by the process of personification, but on the other hand, to remember always that we are not talking about things, but about processes, which are actually very fluid and in change, and may be much bigger than we understand at first. On the one hand, it will be very useful for us to think in terms of homunculi, little people within the person. But on the other hand, we must be aware of giving them a status which they do not deserve and which would not be proper. They are in fact moments in a process of change and development which is lifelong. We have to hang on to the dialectic of this ability to handle these apparent contradictions and paradoxes. History. It is not easy to discuss the history of the idea of subpersonalities. It is one of those concepts so common in the field of human sciences, which has a long past but a short history. Most primitive cultures, both ancient and modern, have been aware of altered states of consciousness and spirit possession, both of which are forerunners of the modern idea of subpersonalities. Priests, witch doctors, and shamans have made these ideas a stock in trade since early in the history of the human race. There were sleep temples in ancient Greece and in Egypt, where patients were encouraged to go into altered states of consciousness, were actually hypnotized, or were talked to during their sleep and given curative suggestions. Gods and goddesses, as we shall see later, can sometimes usefully be thought of as projected subpersonalities. The Druids, the Celtic priesthood, are supposed to have been experts in the use of these methods. In primitive cultures, these changes have been brought about through the use of trances, and transcendentation has been brought about by means of rhythm, drums, dancing, chanting, and so forth. The earliest example I have come across of someone actually talking to a subpersonality and being answered back comes in an Egyptian document of approximately 2200 BC, a dialogue between a suicidal man and his soul. This is quoted in full and explained at length in Barbara Hanna's 1981, who makes some very interesting comments on it. In the Republic, Plato speaks of three parts of the psyche: the rational, the appetitive, concerned with bodily needs such as hunger and thirst, and the spirited one. In the Phaedrus, he speaks more concretely of a three-part psyche, imagined as a charioteer and two horses. One horse is a lover of honor, modesty, and temperance, who seems to be prudent and restrained. The other, a crooked, lumbering animal with insolence, pride, and impulsiveness, which seems very much the voice of instinct. Many later thinkers had different versions of this type of approach, and in the Middle Ages we find this sort of thing. The problem of the unity of personality had always been pondered over by St. Augustine in his Confessions. Considering the change that had taken place in him since his conversion, Augustine remarked that his old pagan personality, of which nothing seemed to remain in his waking state, still must exist, since it was revived at night and in his dreams. He wrote, "Am I not myself, O Lord my God, and yet there is so much difference between myself and myself within the moment, wherein I pass from waking to sleeping, or return from sleeping to waking." This brings Augustine to discuss the problem of the dreamer's moral responsibility for his dreams. Later, the analogous problem of the individual's responsibility for actions committed by his secondary personality would become the subject of similar investigation. Quote from Ellenberger, 1970. Augustine also emphasized the fact that memories from early infancy, which we had thought to be entirely lost, can reappear, and that our brains retain traces of all that we had previously experienced.